Hi, I'm Elena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to a little discussion of the books I read while I had the flu. Let me know what you have been reading this week. I would love to know if you have some recommendations for me or books that I really definitely should not pick up. I listened to a bunch of audiobooks while being sick, and I also had to read a book for a book club. We are discussing this book today in a live show, if all goes well, and that is A Pair of Blue Eyes by Thomas Hardy. I keep on saying The Bluest Eye because that's like Toni Morrison's famous book, a very different perception of blue eyes. I think my first thought while finishing this was, one, this is one of the most romance-heavy plots I've read from Hardy, and two, it's so Hardy. I will mostly discuss this book in a live show, of course, but it's higher up in my general thoughts of Thomas Hardy books. I don't think it's necessarily the best, but I think it was very engaging to read. Some of his other books are a little bit more clouded and less straightforward, and I guess I enjoyed quite a straightforward book from Hardy. That in the last 2 weeks is the only classic I've really read. I think I discussed Victorian Psycho for a little bit in one of my Victober videos, but I finished that one as well on audiobook. This is such a crazy historical fiction. On one hand, it feels like a bit of a traditional historical fiction, but then it has all these more gruesome bits in it, and you realize that you're reading a horror, and especially towards the ending, just it completely explodes, and I found it incredibly disturbing but also very enjoyable to read. And it's one of those shorter books that kind of stays with you even though you may not love it because of its gruesomeness, but I do think I have a fascination for short horror books. The feeling I got from this is quite similar to David Diop's book I read a while back that was the International Booker Prize. It discusses some kind of social constructs and mental health combined with a lot of gruesomeness, and Victorian Psycho was definitely that for me. This book is both, I would say, horror in a genre fiction kind of way with quite a bit of literary fiction mixed into it. So it starts out with a woman who's going to be, it's set in the Victorian era clearly, and we have a woman who is clearly very troubled, literally a psychopath in a mental illness context. You look at the way she's described in the book and the way that being a psychopath is described in the context of mental illness, there were a lot of similarities. And she is a governess, and clearly things start to happen, and there were some twists as well in this book which I found very interesting within the context of mental health, more mental illness in this book, I think. And it's very gruesome, very horror-like. I actually really enjoyed this. I think I gave it 4 stars, and to people who enjoy more horror-like stories, I would highly recommend this. Still staying in the Halloween atmosphere, it does have a bit of gruesome parts, but it's definitely not a horror. This is a romance called The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by the author Megan Bannon. Oh, the previous book was written by Virginia Vito. This is quite, I would say, a confusing fantasy world. We have demigods, zombie-like creatures, and a lot of people who, or at least we follow the people who have undertaking businesses. The male main character is called Hart, and he's a marshal who is someone who catches the zombies. The female main character is called Mercy, and she runs an undertaking business. Actually, her father and her brother do technically run it. There is definitely some misogyny in this world. She runs it practically. They have met over the years because he catches zombies. I guess these are zombies that are still quite linked to the previous humans they used to be, so their bodies are handled with a lot of care and respect, and that is something that the undertakers do, and they have their own way as well. I think it's a bit based in Greek myth because it's a lot about boats somehow. Maybe not Greek, maybe more North mythology, but it really doesn't matter to the story because we get an enemies to lovers relationship between Hart and Mercy. I love the characters in this book because they both have their difficulties, and in that way it was a bit of a slow burn, but they were just both very lovable, and they really had their own little world. If I remember right, it was a dual perspective, which really worked with that as well for me. When it came to the fantasy building, I will have to say I am not a big fantasy fan this year. I didn't really see the purpose of it being so far removed of our current world, and it was a bit too difficult for me to get into and to just accept that this was the world we were thrown into. I am definitely more of a low fantasy fan. Romance-wise, the miscommunication in his book was big. It was just constantly on the edge of it becoming too annoying. So if that is like a hard no for you, then don't read this book. Something that I think is missing in a lot of romances that was very present in this one is that the discussion of job and passion and work is very present in this book, and the characters discuss both in their inner monologue but also with other characters how they feel about their work and what it means to them. And the perspective on death was also interesting in this book, and maybe also a bit triggering at parts. Maybe check content warnings for this book before you get into it. But that is something I really like, because sometimes in romance books it's like, oh, this is their job, and then it's mentioned one time that they're doing their job, and then it means nothing for them for the rest of the book. Well, I feel like for a lot of people their job is so forming for them as a person. So I really like that was very present in this book. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I know there are more books in the series, but I'm not super interested in reading the rest. I think I've discussed this author before this year, but I am loving Alexandra Vasti. I think most of her books are traditionally published last year and this year, so most of her work is coming out quite fast, and we're getting a new release, or maybe this month, and something else is coming early 2026. I believe these books have been indie published before or self-published. I really should research that before announcing it in a video, but at least they're very widely available now, which is great. I will have to make a little note that the audiobooks are not available, at least not in my region. I think there are 1 or 2 available in the US. No fault of the author, but mostly the publisher. I feel like audiobooks are such an important accessibility tool, especially for me with like dyslexia and chronic fatigue. It says how much I like the books that I'm able to read them all without having access to the audiobooks, because for me these kind of books that are just romance fun, I almost always listen to the audiobooks. The most recent one I read is, I don't understand how to pronounce this title, but that is Ne'er Duke Well. Like, I don't know what this means, but I like the book. This one was published in 2024 and I gave it 4.5 stars. That is how much I loved it. We follow Peter, and his grandfather has passed away, and his father as well, I believe, which is why he comes into his title of Duke. He was raised by his mother in America, so he is a bit of an odd one out when he comes into society in London. When he comes to the UK, he finds that he has 2 half siblings that his father fathered after he went back to England outside of his marriage, and his siblings are orphans as well, so he wants to take care of them, but because they're not legally his siblings, it's a whole issue. I don't know if it would have been such a big issue as is described in a book, because it's one of the main things that drives the plot forward, but it works in a book. And then we follow Selena, and something I really like about Alexandra Vasti's characters, that her female main characters always have a passion, usually a secret passion that they work on, like science or politics related. And I love that. Selena is no different. You'll discover that in your own time when you read this book. Although it's possible it's in the first chapter, I do not remember. But Selena and Peter have known each other for a little bit. They've met a few times, and then they meet again on the street while he is taking his siblings out to do some shopping. And his siblings are very quirky. Somehow I don't enjoy reading middle grade anymore, but I love it when children are just quirky and fun and well written in adult books. These siblings were really fun and I really enjoyed them. And then they meet again, and Selena decides she wants to help Peter gain guardianship of his siblings. And then ensues some fake dating, and it's a whole thing, and it's lovely. Something I really appreciate about this book is that it doesn't have the traditional romance plotline. Some things happen slower, some things happen faster in this book, and therefore it feels a bit more fresh than a general historical romance. Another thing why I love this author so much is because all the books are connected. So you have such great side characters, and one of the side characters I'd already read the book from, so I already felt connected to her, and you just feel that all the side characters have their own world and have so much more to them than just being a part of the main character's story. That's what I really love about interconnected romance books. All these characters just feel so rich. The relationship between these two I just adored and loved, and it was so true and honest and pure. I will have to say some parts where it was not about the romance but about other things in the book, it could have gone a little bit deeper. We could have gone maybe a little bit more drama. This book is generally quite light-hearted. In some points it's exactly what you need, but for me I felt like, oh, I could use a little bit more emotion, a little bit more drama. So that's why I gave it a 4.5. But I am such a big fan of this author, and I'm just gonna read everything she Right. That's it for the books that I have finished, but I'm currently listening to a historical fiction that was on my priority TBR, and that is The Language of Food by Annabel Abs, and I am really enjoying this. I will be honest, it took me a little while to get into. I thought, oh gosh, this is just heavy writing, I'm not into it, but it's a dual perspective of one, Elizabeth Acton, who is a very famous writer who wrote one of the most well-known, at least in the Victorian era, cookery books for just general households, and it's about a woman who is hired as her servant who helps her with the cooking. I know Elizabeth Acton was real. I don't think her servant was real, at least she probably had servants, of course, but I don't know if there was a servant who helped her so actively in writing the book. Mostly she is fictional, but she's very interesting and it's very beautifully written. I'm about halfway through and I really want to keep on reading this one. The servant's perspective, she's not called Eliza, and Kirby. I enjoy her most because she feels like more of a unique perspective that you don't really see in classics, and because I've been reading so many classics, a character like Eliza Acton, who is, I would say, middle class, her working in a kitchen is actually quite scandalous in a way, but she and her mother have kind of fallen from grace because her father messed up his business, I believe. So I feel like her character is something I have seen and read quite a bit in the last month. So I'm not as interested in her, although I love it when we use a real historical figure for a book. I'm very much interested in Anne Kirby, and I think this is gonna be a great one. I'm having great expectations for this. And then, will you believe it, if you have followed my channel for longer than 2 or 3 years, you know that at some point I started reading the Brontes by Julia Barker, and it had gathered a lot of dust even though I was already halfway through. So once Victoria ended, I decided to pick that one back up again, and I've already read 4 chapters. That doesn't sound like much, but in a 1100 page biography that is quite a lot. Around page 650, I don't move this book around, it's too heavy, it's downstairs, and that's where it will stay until I finished it. I have discovered some interesting things. There is a part of the Brontes' lives that I feel like we don't know that much about, and I was hoping to get to know more than I got to know. This is the part where Emily and Charlotte are in Brussels, and where Anne and Branwell are working at the same household. And while we get quite a lot of what happens when they are back home, I would have loved to know more about what happened there, because I know they corresponded with each other, so I don't fully understand why the author chose not to have us be with them in that moment. They were there for at least a year. Anne was there for years, so I don't understand really why we are not there longer. But maybe that correspondence got lost. Something that happened to me while I was reading the Brontes letters years ago is that I started to dislike Charlotte more and more just by reading her letters. And it was not my intention to have any sort of judgment on her when I was reading her letters. She was not the sister I was most interested in, because Wuthering Heights is my forte, and I found very interesting politically more. I think I found her more interesting politically than necessarily as an author. I feel like if she had lived, she would have been most likely to become a journalist of the 3. Having said that, Charlotte she's not a nice person, and while maybe we overly expect that from someone in the Victorian era, I feel like Charlotte and Branwell both showed quite manipulative and unkind and ungenerous sides of themselves in their letters. So while I was reading Charlotte's letters, I started to dislike her more and more. And I feel like Julia Barker, the same happened to her, because she is judgmental towards Charlotte in a way that is not just her writing down facts that she has found, but also judging Charlotte for certain behaviors and for being too harsh on her brother. I definitely think this author is too soft on Branwell. I think the author doesn't really understand the effect of substance abuse as well as we would now, because this book, let's be honest, it was written 20 years ago, and the way that she talks about Branwell's substance abuse is not with the knowledge from today. And I feel we can get a very different perspective of it, because she sees it as a lack of, I think she does see it as an illness, but also as a lack of willpower, which right now we understand that has very little to do with substance abuse. I think the way that someone would behave in a situation like that would be more taxing and difficult than Julia Barker gives especially Charlotte credit for. I fully understand and sympathize with Julia Barker for feeling that way. I do wish she would take a bit of a step back, and I hope that she will in the future. Because yes, I don't think Charlotte was necessarily a nice person. This is also her biography, so let's not go that way. Maybe it's a bit of a response towards Elizabeth Gaskell, because I haven't read it yet, but I believe she gives too much sympathy towards Charlotte and very less towards Bramwell and Patrick. So I feel like Julia Barker is trying to flip the switch a little bit on that, but I think she's going too far. Yeah, there were some interesting parts in letters that I will definitely remember, and especially just the intelligence of Anne. I think it's so often underrated, because I feel like, gosh, she would have been one hell of a journalist. And not that I don't like her novels, but I think she is strongest in her observations. I think that is it for now with my current reads and the books I have finished. I have to rest for a little bit today as well, because I'm better, but usually the flu also triggers some chronic fatigue from me as well. So I have to rest quite a lot. I'm gonna finish my tea, edit this video, and I will see you hopefully next week in another weekly update. Doei!